is up, guys? Welcome to the Meaning of Podcast. I am Ace.
This is RB3.
And this is the podcast where we talk about your favorite directors and the deeper meaning within their films. And once again, guys, we have a very special guest. I am proud to announce that we have Mr. Mark Reilly in the studio.
Well, gentlemen, thanks for having me.
Thank you so much for coming on, man. I really am excited to talk about this certain topic. And when I was thinking about bringing you on, because you were definitely one of the first people I thought of to come on the show,
thanks.
I was, figuring stuff out, and immediately it kind of clicked in me. We're both Superman fans.
Oh, yeah.
What better to talk about than the journey of the character of Superman throughout the screen, especially the movies, but I want to touch on the TV shows just because I love the TV shows.
Oh, yeah. And I want to learn from you on that one.
I got some great stuff to talk to you guys about in the TV aspect of it. I've talked to RB3 a little bit about it, but Superman is who I consider to be the greatest superhero.
Same.
I think you would agree.
Yeah, yeah.
And I really do feel like it's always been Batman is one thing because people have struggled with Batman, but people have really struggled more with Superman.
Yeah. Batman, I think the struggle is because Batman is human, and so most people can identify. And Superman, who can, most likely lift a planet up and take it for a ride. You're like, well, how do you identify with him?
Yeah. And there's this aspect, and there's this topic of debate, RB3, that directors and studios don't understand Superman and don't know how to make a Superman movie. Let's just start out with that. Why do you think that is, RB3? And you think that's true?
No, I don't think that's true. I think a lot of people get what Superman represents. I think overall Superman just kind of, at least in the movies, at least we're talking about Christopher Reeve's movies, we're talking about Brandon Routh's, one time, and we're talking about Henry Cavill. I feel like the central theme in all of that has just been like this overwhelming sense of, optimism and Americana, kind of a spirited view of what an American symbol is supposed to represent. I mean, his suit is like red, white, not red, white, and blue, not literally white, but it's yellow. But it represents like the American flag, It's very much. So I feel like a lot of directors take that approach, and I feel like the times that it falls short is when it's just the perspective that a director brings to it. So I feel like people understand what Superman is supposed to represent, but I feel like somebody could get so overwhelmed in what I feel like a director or a writer can become so overwhelmed in what their representation of Superman is over what the actual character in and of itself is. I feel like I feel like as of recent examples, Captain America is actually like a good example of what a Superman character is for the Marvel Cinematic Universe, right? He also represents the same kind of thing of like overwhelming optimism, patriotism, and Americana, but it's also, you see him change throughout the franchise in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Yeah. In the beginning, he was very trustful and very optimistic, but by the end of the franchise, he questioned a lot of like government stuff because of the things he saw in Winter Soldier.
Exactly.
But whereas something like a Henry Cavill Superman, he kind of just jumps right into having the character itself kind of just jumps right into having a more pessimistic perspective. So it kind of throws a lot of people off. But I personally vibe with all three of them.
Yeah.
Personally, I mean Brandon Routh. That's less memorable,
Yeah,
But
that movie was like a road bump. In the development process, So.
Yeah, well, it was very nostalgic too. I feel like they purposely made it very much like reminiscent of Christopher Reeves.
To its fault, I think.
Yeah, I think a little bit too.
It was a little too, Donner Superman. For me.
It was, and the opening of the movie is just like the opening of '78. And it's they brought back Williams themes and everything like that. So, and I think they wanted it to be like a sequel to the Superman movies from Donner.
That's exactly what it was. Yeah. What do you think? Why people struggle to nail down the character of Superman, and why people have this topic of discussion is saying like, oh, we don't know how to make him relatable. That's the word that people always throw around.
Yeah, I think I kind of mentioned up top, when you have an all-powerful being that's essentially a god, the Christ references aren't lost on me, and I think that, when you have Donner's 78 version, you didn't really go into a lot of psyche of Superman. He just kind of, except for Pa Kent, Ma Kent, you got that they were a slice of Americana, treat this boy well, you're here for a reason. And then he goes in the Fortress of Solitude and he comes out Superman. And he literally is Superman from that day on. And I think that he was the big blue Boy Scout. He was always doing good. And the big arc there was don't use your power to change human course or the history. And he goes against that and saves Lois Lane at the end by turning the world back. And that's a sign of how powerful he is, right? Mm-hmm. And people loved it. And I think that at that point in 78, they wanted to love a big blue Boy Scout.
Yeah.
And when you get Brandon Routh, that was a completely different time. That you can't rely on nostalgia. You can't rely on just, I'm here to do good. You wanted your Superman, you wanted your superheroes to have a little bit more depth and a little bit more psyche here. Mm-hmm. I think Zack Snyder, it might be a little bit controversial. I think he got the closest to understanding Superman.
Yeah,
because
I think we're all in agreement.
Yeah.
We're all RB3 and our Zack Snyder fans and Man of Steel fans.
Thank God, because I am too. Because I love Man of Steel.
We both agree that Man of Steel is our favorite DCEU movie.
Yeah, favorite DC.
Mine too.
I love Man of Steel.
Yeah.
Number one, and I even like Batman v Superman. But
I do too.
But I think
some of it doesn't work. But
some of it doesn't work.
I like some of it. Yeah.
Superman wasn't very much the focus in Batman v Superman.
That's my issue with it. That's why I didn't like it.
Yeah.
That's my issue with it, because I was like, I want to see a follow-up, a Man of Steel 2, and what we got was Ben Affleck pouting.
Exactly.
And I was like, God, I don't like that. But keep going. Yeah.
No, but I wanted to go deeper into that because what Zack Snyder did, and what I love, is that Superman's character is always funneled through the character of Pa Kent and Ma Kent because that's where he starts.
Yeah.
So those teachings make him who he is today. So if he were to land in the backyard of a horrible family, we'd have a very different superhero, as we're going to probably see with Brightburn.
That's exactly what it is. Yeah.
So when you have Pa Kent, Kevin Costner saying, no, do not show yourself. You got to hide it. That's kind of like the world we live in right now. What would an all-powerful being look like? What would they? How would Earth react? And even Perry White says, is like, can you imagine if somebody was out there, what that would do to the world? Yeah. And Superman had to take that on and process it, and then he ultimately does come out for the good of the world and save the world for the first time in Man of Steel. And then they just kind of moved on to the next one, and it was about him wanting to stop Batman because that was against his morals.
Yeah.
What I think you could do with Superman that I don't think anybody's touched on but Zack Snyder is the alienation of being the last of your kind. How do you fit into this world? Can you fall in love with somebody that's mortal? What will the world do? How will they stop me? And where is my place in all this? And I think Tim Burton wanted to do that with Nicolas Cage in the ill-fated,
Superman Returns. Superman Returns.
Superman Lives.
Superman Lives.
Yeah. So
documentary.
I think that he had an interesting angle to it, where it's like, how alienated he feels. Where do I fit? I think the main reason Superman is not working in movies because they haven't hit, and again, I say that knowing full well that Man of Steel worked for me.
Yeah.
But I think that studios don't get the character that he's an alien and the last of his kind, and everybody we're really circle that, the last of his kind, and that you can maybe start to peel back the layers on Superman.
Yeah. It's I don't know if you have anything else to say on that, but
well, no, yeah, I mean, I 100%. I think was Zack Snyder. He really wanted to get into the complication of like today and how much more complicated people are and how much more complicated we expect heroes to be in our stories today, right? I mean, this we're in a period of seeing heroes like Walter White from Breaking Bad, or a lot of these like morally complicated heroes, The Sopranos, like all of these. And a lot of the movies starts to represent that too, with the new Batman, with the
morally gray heroes, almost anti-heroes. Logan is another example.
The Nolan Batman movies.
Yeah,
and, I mean that's what they're trying to emulate. But showing that complication, I guess it was kind of complicated because I guess you have to first establish the character to a lot of people, before you start showing what like corrupts them. It's I think probably one of my bigger problems with Man of Steel is that. When the next snap happens, like it's very impactful. But if somebody has no idea who Superman is, they would have no idea that that's impactful for Superman.
That's a significant thing.
Yeah,
I think that's the biggest issue, right? Is that if I'm a studio executive, the biggest thing with making a Superman movie and a Batman movie, to be fair, superhero movies in general, is targeting children, right? Targeting little boys, and I think they struggle with being like, well, who's he gonna punch? Like that's the thing. They're like, how's Superman has to be cool.
Yeah.
And it's easy with Batman because martial arts is a huge aspect of his character.
Right.
But with Superman, they're like, well, Superman has to punch people, and it's like that's not like no, he doesn't. Like one of the what makes Superman great is the aspect of his battles, in my opinion, from the comics, and I'm going to do a lot of stuff from the comics. I'm going to be that guy. And from the animated series and shows is Lex. Lex is my favorite all-time villain in anything. More than any villain in Star Wars, more than anything. I love Lex Luthor because he brings that idea of Superman never punches Lex, obviously, because he would kill him in one shot. And the battles that he has with Lex are much more social, political, intellectual. Like those are the battles. Like, what does he represent? What does this mean for politics? What does this mean for America? What does this mean for the world? Lex battles that, and he's not like this pure evil maniacal scientist. He's much more of a guy who thinks he's fighting for humanity, and he feels like Superman's a threat to humanity. So I think that's the issue that a lot of studios have is like, where's the punching start? And trying to sell that to kids is it's something.
It's a great point, and again goes to his character because you could focus on his alienation and where do I fit in this world, but you could also focus on his power. How is he going to punch somebody? What does Superman know? If he punches Lex Luthor, he's going to kill him. So it'd be interesting to go into his psychology and say, well, I have to pull punches. I'm Superman. And that when I fight somebody like Doomsday, I'm going to give it everything I got. And then if Doomsday fights back and is like, woo, like in the comic, he's like, I'm giving him everything I got in the Death of Superman run. Giving Doomsday everything I've got, and he's not going down. So that's a great character for Superman as well. It's like the different levels of how he has to face off against his villains. Because if it's a bank robber, you know, he can go in there and kill this guy easily. He can heat vision this guy, he's gone. But he just wants to get him, scare him, maybe, and bring him to justice. So I think that's another interesting thing that you can go into Superman's character.
I think Man of Steel should have had a little more pulling the punches, though. I think if that movie had a little more, if it was a little more restrained and it was a little more about the beginnings of Superman and like the more of the optimism, I guess, side of it, then I think it would have. I think a lot more people would have appreciated. I appreciated what it was going for.
I think I really do feel. Oh, I'm sorry, I cut you off. Go ahead.
No, I was saying I appreciate what it was going for, but I think that if it pulled back a little bit, it would have been.
But I don't know, man. I really feel like walking out of that theater with my friends, we all were like, that was freaking dope, right? And they were like, yeah, that was dope. The music was amazing. The cinematography was crazy. That was Superman, and that was amazing. Like I don't know, that's kind of how I felt, but I kind of want to get away from that because I was rewatching I've rewatched Man of Steel, rewatched a few animated movies, and just having a conversation about Game of Thrones last night.
Oh boy!
And I'm realizing, yeah, I know, but I'm realizing what Game of Thrones eventually, because we're getting up to the series finale this Sunday, is trying to say, and I think of characters like Tywin, like Cersei, like Jaime, and I know this is all going over your head, RB3.
Yeah, I have no idea.
You don't watch Game of Thrones?
You don't watch Game of Thrones?
No.
I'm leaving. Okay, that's it.
But eventually, what this story is trying to say is really a commentary, and I know I'm not breaking news by saying this, but power, right?
Oh,
it's the idea
absolutely.
of power corrupting, and that's Superman. It's the idea of someone who's literally a god who has all the power and is not corrupted.
Right.
And someone who can have all the power to literally change people and to say, I can rule over you and make this world a better place, but I won't do it even though I can. Like that's a big theme in Man of Steel, and that's a big theme in All-Star Superman, which is another comic and animated movie where he says, well, I can literally be like, make humanity better by forcing them to be better, by saying, you don't do this, you don't do that because I'm the God.
Right.
But he doesn't impose his will on humanity. He has all the power in the world, but he uses that power for good, and he uses it as a symbol, not as an imposing, foreign threat, because that's what he would be. And I kept running that through my head because I was like, man, that's really what it is. It's the idea of power showing who you really are, and when it shows who Superman really is, it's idealism. That's what he represents.
Yeah, it's great. It made me think of what you were saying here. Nature versus nurture. It goes back to the parents again.
It does.
If and you might know this, a great run, Squadron Supreme. Are you aware of this? It was I believe it was printed under Marvel, but I could be wrong. The sweaties out there could probably correct me. But it's essentially like, here's your version of Superman. We're going to do something different. Here's a version of Batman, something different. But it was with I think his name was Hyperion, is that you have the regular opening of Superman, the mythology that is, a ship carrying a little small child from another world, crash lands in the backyard of this really nice couple. They go, oh my God, we're going to keep him. And then there's a knock at the door, and the government is right there because, of course, the government's right there. They're monitoring everything that lands on Earth. And they go, we're taking that kid. And then they study the kid, and they make him into a government weapon. So instead of him being raised by Ma and Pa Kent, he's raised by government, prodded, experimented, and he is a loose cannon. He's not, he knows he's under the thumb of the government, but soon, like throughout that run, he wants to break free of that. And then you got an all-powerful being that was trained by a government that wants to push against being controlled, is a dangerous character. So if you think about Superman, if he went anywhere else and it wasn't his parents, is it nature? Is it nurture? What is it? And it's I feel it was nurture. And that's why Superman is as good as he is.
That's exactly, and obviously I can get into Smallville, which literally has seasons about that. The concept of what if Superman's parents weren't Jonathan and Martha Kent, were someone else.
But I think I hate to keep bringing up Marvel in this discussion, but I think Marvel kind of shows that dichotomy between having a Captain America and having a Winter Soldier, having the Captain America, Steve Rogers, who had the right past, who wasn't corrupted during his slumber in the ice, but then he comes back and he's morally complicated by today's issues. But then he's kind of a man of his own time, a man of his past, so he's kind of alienated in and of himself. Whereas Bucky literally becomes a government experiment, and he comes out and he's massively evil, and he just and it's his journey of trying to bring that back. So I feel like Marvel kind of plays in a lot of the realms that Superman typically represents. I mean, I'm sure it's kind of parallels in the comic books as well, but at least in the movies, they kind of show you how I think a modern Superman could kind of work in today's time.
Let's jump right into it. It's crazy because we're seeing now Avengers Endgame probably reaching to be the biggest movie ever. It's creeping up on Avatar, which would be $2.8 billion.
I'm upset. I like Avatar. I like it being the top film personally.
But here's the thing. It's crazy to think that the superhero movie genre, which dumb people say is dead. No, it's not, considering it's going to hit $3 billion. But it all started back in 1978 with Richard Donner and an actor named Christopher Reeve with this movie called Superman. And this is essentially, I mean, we always say X-Men, Spider-Man, Blade. Some people say Blade, but this is the one, or 89 Batman, but this is the first superhero movie. This is the one that started it all. And people loved this movie. What is it about this movie? I'll start with you, RB3. That resonated so much with the current audience and with, throughout time, because it really is a beloved movie still.
The 1978 Superman, I think the reason why it resonated so well is because for a long time, Superman had just been considered kids property, kids fiction. It mostly existed in serials and animated shows. I don't know if you ever seen the 1940s Fletcher Superman cartoons. There's only 14 episodes of them in total, but they're all on the public domain, so we can't even include clips in this episode. But they're actually really visually beautiful, but they're very kid oriented. They're cartoons, and he only existed on TV. So this is the first time that not only Superman was represented seriously, but a superhero in general, a comic book character in general, was kind of represented seriously on screen. So they took it seriously. They had Mario Puzo, who was one of the writers of the Godfather.
Oh yeah, the original writer of the book.
You had Marlon Brando playing the part of Jor-El. So it was a big, they took the property really serious, and obviously Richard Donner was a pretty big name at that point too. They took it with a lot of respect, and I think that's important because it really defined what superhero movies would become to that point after. I think that's really, now, you saw Tim Burton take it seriously with Batman. Afterwards, you saw, of course, Nolan take it very, very seriously with The Dark Knight, and now Kevin Feige and the Marvel Cinematic Universe taking their movie seriously. So it kind of set the standard and defined what it would become.
It really did, and I think they also promised a a movie-going experience just from the tagline. You will believe a man can fly. And I think that shows that it's like you're going to sit down and have a blockbuster here. You're going to sit down and believe this man can fly, and we're going to entertain the hell out of you. In a time that we have the Star Wars is already there.
Yeah,
Jaws is already there.
Yeah,
Close Encounters of the Third Kind. You know, the birth of the blockbuster. It's wedged right in there, and so I think they knew what they were doing with that by making that tagline. A man can fly is I think some brilliant marketing leading up to the release.
Right. Yeah, and it's crazy because I was rewatching a little bit of it, and it feels ahead of its time. Not just with the themes, but with the special effects. They're pretty good for considering it's 1970.
Yeah, 1978.
I was gonna say like when he flies, I'm like, yo, that looks good. That looks really good.
Right.
But I really want to get to the heart of this movie, and the heart of this movie to me is Christopher Reeve embodying the character of Superman and really showing you this really down heart, kind-hearted guy. He's a really nice guy, and you buy it, and you buy that because of Christopher Reeve. His performance essentially is why you buy that. What do you think of how he kind of set the standard for? This is my opinion, and I'm sure I don't know if you guys would agree or not, but from that up to that point, everything we've had from Superman, a little bit of the animated series, a little bit from the animated show as well with George Reeve, I believe. But this is what people, when you have Superman the animated series, when you have Justice League, when you have Justice League Unlimited, Smallville, all these property that's coming off Superman. That's the Superman they're trying to be. They're trying to be Christopher Reeve. That to me is so powerful.
He's the gold standard that everybody kind of holds up there. When you hear the casting of a new Superman, you immediately compare him to Christopher Reeve. And I think that, again, going to the you will believe a man can fly, Donner knew what he was doing from day one. They wanted to put Robert Redford in that suit. And Donner said, no. Yeah. They're going to all look and say, look at Robert Redford in tights. Yeah. They needed an unknown to come in so you could believe, so you didn't have any preconceived notions on who this actor is or what movie they made before this. It was something that's Superman. And you look at the screen test, he was skinny and he was sweating under the armpits, because he was so nervous, but then he just turned on. Juilliard trained, Robin Williams' roommate, Christopher Reeve, comes in and everybody believed it, and it's just magic. It really was that he's now iconic, and we'll always know, and he's the best. And that's what I love about the fact that these filmmakers knew at the time. The Salkins wanted a name because they needed to sell this thing. Yeah. And they got their names in Marlon Brando and Gene Hackman to put them around him. But Donner was correct. He needed to make the audience believe that this guy is Superman. And the only way to do that is not put Sylvester Stallone in there like they talked about, not put Dustin Hoffman in there like they talked about. That would have been weird. Dustin Hoffman?
Yeah. You lost me at Stallone.
Stallone, I believe, was one of them. Dustin Hoffman, Robert Redford.
Dustin Hoffman would have been crying the entire time.
I can't even.
Superman.
I can't even. He's like, well, I'm here to save the day.
Yeah.
Not just
couldn't
that,
do it.
I was like, hey, I'm Superman. It's Sylvester Stallone.
Yo, I'm gonna go away and save Lois.
That would be fantastic. That would be weird.
That was so weird. But I kind of want to go back to your connection to this movie. Is this what made you a Superman fan, or were you a fan of something else beforehand?
No, it's the movie. I mean, I know that there are comics. I got in comics a lot later in my life. Superman was just, when I saw him on screen, I mean, I just went, this is it. Yeah. And this is one of those movies, along with Star Wars, along with Jaws.
That's it.
That I
when
watched.
You watch as a kid.
That I would just put in endlessly. And I remember vividly going with my dad to the Ma and Pa shop, VHS store down the street, where I would see the VHS covers, and it's like, do I want to watch Superman today, or do I want to watch Superman 2 today? Because those were my favorite. They kind of went hand in hand, because Donner even started filming back to back, but then was fired after part 1, and Richard Lester came in, and that's a whole nother podcast. But that was the movie that got me into the character of Superman, that I just identified with him, because there was something I immediately placed myself in the shoes of Superman, because you want to fly, you want X-ray vision, you want heat vision, and be the strongest man in the universe. So it wasn't that I identified with him, but as a child, I wanted to be him. And so as you get older, you start to see what he's going through those eyes, and you're hearing the teachings of Jor-El saying, you can teach them to be better, Kal-El. You can be the one that they'll look in, and you can guide them to the light so that they can be better people. Don't interfere, but just be the example, and you will make this world a better place. And that's why I think I identified with Superman. It was like why I have a Superman tattoo, why I named my dog Cal, is because I always want to be a better man because Superman was. Because he had all that power and he wasn't corrupted.
Right.
And he could still be super, but still be a good guy and go get that cat out of the tree. And I think that's something to believe in.
That's so good. Yeah. And it's one of those things, too, where a lot of it is the connection you have as a young kid, as a child.
Yeah.
That, like you just said about Star Wars, that's me with Star Wars, man. Like watching Star Wars when I was a young guy, young kid, like that connected me to a point where now, like everything you just said, like I want to name my kids Star Wars things. I want to get a Star Wars tattoo. Like I'm not even joking, because that's what it represents to me. It represents an ideal that I can, hopefully reach up to, or at least attempt to reach to.
Exactly.
And I think that's the best part of Superman. I personally believe that, and I'm going to get into that. And I know you want to mention that you wanted to get into it, but a lot of people were talking about like a Superman movie now, right? In 2019, 2020, whatever year it is so important because of what he represents, especially RB3 in this political atmosphere where a lot of people talk about what Superman represents and what he is. But what he is really an immigrant. He really is. He represents that immigrant story. And I know the creators of Superman, Jerry Siegel and Joe Shuster, had, a lot of struggles with their life. And a lot of it was, feeling rejected. But having that, it's a really interesting aspect, right? Because he was raised obviously in America, and he was raised in Kansas, and he was raised with that American values, American idealism, and those aspects of America. But at the same time, he is truly from Krypton. He is from both worlds, and he's both one and the same. It's one of those things where someone who is first generation, I'm first generation, where my parents weren't born in this country, but I was. I have that same connection where I connect to it because I feel like I am both, Latino American and Latino, but at the same time I am equally American, and I feel like having that two connection, and obviously having the Mexico and Colombian side and being both, where people are like, well, what are you? And I'm like, I'm both. I'm Latino, I'm American. These are two things that I don't have to separate. Right. I can be both. And that's what he represents, and the fact that he wants to jump in regardless of the fact that people reject him, I personally believe is a very powerful message that people need to hear right now. I don't know if you agree.
Oh,
100%.
Yeah. I agree with that 100%. I love that because I think that is the character of Superman, and I think it's something that is beautiful because Superman then they call him he's American. Yeah. At the end of Man of Steel, I'm as American as they come. I'm a Kansas boy. Yeah. So
that's good.
That's good. He's known as that, but when then you flip the coin, you know that he is an immigrant. Yeah. He is from another world, and it's like, why can't he come in here, do good, and adopt both, and know where he came from, but also say, I'm American, I'm here. I want to be a part of it. I think that's beautiful. It is the American dream.
Right.
And that's what Superman does in the guise of a superhero story, is that as an immigrant story to come and be a part of Americana and change it for the better. And that's why I love it.
Yeah, and it's one of those things, like looking back at the comics of All-Star Superman especially, where he talks about like even what I wear, like that suit is a Krypton suit. Like I know a lot of people are like, no, it's a Kryptonian suit. That's what it is. So he's wearing his traditional Kryptonian suit. He's wearing the symbol of Krypton of his house. So everything he wears and what he represents and where he hangs out, like the Fortress of Solitude, Krypton. Like he's still keeping those things. So he realizes like, I don't know Krypton. I didn't hang out there, but I'm still Kryptonian, and I'm still gonna have that stuff within me, while at the same time, being American. I love that connection, that bridge that he has.
Yeah, well, I mean, look at the dual identity. If you look at Superman, Kal-El in the Superman, the Kryptonian suit, the Fortress of Solitude, that's him holding on to Krypton. When he's Clark Kent, that's Clark Kent from Kansas.
Yeah,
that's him.
Well, that's
wanting to be down on the that's his
disguise.
disguise. Not only his disguise, but Superman. Let's be honest, Superman, he doesn't need a disguise.
Yeah,
he could throw those glasses away and just be Superman and just fly around and go, hey, I need some food today. No problem, Superman. Here you go. His secret identity, sure, is to protect the identity of Kal-El, but I think he wants that identity to be a part, to be down on the ground level, and even in Man of Steel, it's like get a job where he's he understands. He's got his ear to the ground so he can help. And that's what I think why he creates the secret identity.
Well, I think this raises a lot of like interesting points. I think especially about the development of the first Superman movie, right? You think about the writer I mentioned again, Mario Puzo, who did The Godfather. The Godfather is very much an immigrant story. The Godfather is very much a movie about Italian immigrants who come to America and experience the American dream and kind of uphold that, and while maintaining their own traditions and inhabit a lot of that. So that screen transition, I think that's why somebody like that would attach themselves to that kind of material, and they treat it with a very defined Americana thing. So I think that perspective of identity is very important, like you said, in Superman and his representation as being an immigrant. And I also think, I kind of reference, how you mentioned how Clark Kent, he puts on the glasses and everything. I think back to that Tarantino monologue in Kill Bill Volume 2, where they're talking about how, the disguise is the Clark Kent while him being himself is Superman. He's the only, while most superheroes have to put on the disguise to become the hero, he's already the hero within. So it's very much, I think he's also very much representative of what a lot of people have to go through as immigrants. Like they kind of have to hide themselves in order to assimilate and assimilate within American culture.
Yeah. What did you want to say? Because you told me beforehand about the political aspects of Superman. Let's just jump into that.
Oh, I kind of mentioned it before. Like, I think, part of the reason why Superman is difficult is because he has to represent the current political state of that time.
Interesting.
And 1978, it was much more optimistic, a lot more united kind of perspective in politics during that time period. You know, it wasn't as much. I mean, I'm sure there was conflicts and everything, as there always is in American history, but this was a lot more of a not as grim of a time as it is now, to say per se.
Sure.
So I think it makes a lot of sense that our new Superman is so divisive amongst like film fans, because naturally our politics is so divisive now.
Interesting,
well, it's a great point, RB3, because you think about it, 1978 when they're developing this thing. I mean, we're at the end of the Vietnam War. And
we got Reagan. I mean, we got Nixon out of office.
Nixon
so
out of office.
President.
And American culture is righting itself, getting away from war and starting to shake it all off and get back to a normal where we're getting the troops back home, and they're wondering how they're going to fit back into society. And I think a lot of people wanted to just smile and believe a man can fly.
Yeah.
And so I think that's why Superman was just, how you doing? I'm good. And to then your point, why Henry Cavill's Superman was so divisive, because we're in this gray area, not only in politics, but it could be, it feels like every day sometimes that a match can spark something that's going to be really awful.
Yeah.
And whether it's politics or wars or like dealing with, we have threats of, Kim Jong-un and launching missiles and whatnot, and here's Superman in the middle of all that. How do you fit him into this world?
And I really do feel like Superman is one of those characters that let's break it down. Like in reality, the origin of Superman, he grew up on a farm in Kansas.
Yeah.
Middle America. Farming, like really, like this is some like for if you're not a fan of the podcast, this is some real white people shit. Like this is like
it's totally white people shit.
But this is how he grew up. Like very traditional values, very traditional morals, very conservative values for Jonathan and Martha Kent. But at the same time, he's the kind of guy.
Very loving values.
Though. Loving values.
Yeah.
That's the word, RB3. Loving. Like there's so many scenes, and everyone goes back to that All-Star Superman scene where that young goth-looking girl is going to commit suicide, and he goes away from Lois, and when he gets the call, he's like, oh, this is really important, Lois. I have to leave you. And he has a really intimate moment with Lois, but he leaves her at that moment. And when it cuts to the next page in the comic, because I was reading it earlier, it's him on top of a building with that girl. And that's Superman. Superman's the kind of person who won't judge you by how you look, won't judge you by your decisions, loves you no matter what, regardless of your race, gender, identity, however it is. He is the guy who will say, I have compassion for you, I love you, and I'm going to accept you. And he hugs that girl. That's such a powerful moment, because that's Superman. His greatest power is his kindness.
Yeah.
It's his compassion. It's his belief in people. It's his love, RB3. He loves everyone, and he wants peace. I was thinking about it today, too. Like, what better superhero to have nowadays in real life, right? I know this is fiction, than Superman. Who better to be an example? You can make an argument for Captain America as well, because I do feel like he has a little bit of those values as well. But Superman would be the perfect bridge between this conversation that we had last week, RB3. We had a 30-minute conversation about politics off camera.
Oh, yeah.
But when we concluded the conversation, we agreed that a lot of this is embedded in this weird racial identity. And in reality, if people, kind of took off their glasses and took a step outside themselves, they would realize, like, oh, no, the same struggles that white people have are the same struggles that black people have. If we just realize, like, oh, you don't have to be so mad at each other. Yeah. That's what Superman represents.
Yeah, we're all in the dirt together.
Yeah.
Ultimately.
And who better than Superman, who grew up on a farm, to be like, come on, guys, like, let's get our shit together.
Yeah.
America, I'm American, and I represent that.
Yeah.
So, I don't know. I just went on a spiel for that.
I love that. No, I love that.
But let's move on to Superman 2, which is different than Superman by far, because it brings in that Kryptonian element. It brings in the idea of Superman being everything that we just said and coming from Krypton, but him seeing the other side of Krypton and being like disappointed that I finally have someone who's from the same place I'm from, and this guy's crazy.
Yeah.
Right.
And that's Zod. But tell me about your connection with Superman 2, which is a great sequel.
It is a great sequel, and I think it's just continued. I mean, I think Superman 2 came out, 1981?
I think it's 80 or 81.
Yeah, it might be 80.
I think it's 80.
Is it 80?
Yeah.
Okay. So it's very close to coming out 1980. Okay,
Yeah.
so very close 2 years later. So I'm still of that age, and I think it's just it's a great sequel in that you brought up the point. Here's my people, but Superman has to go. Who are they? Oh, they're the criminal element of Krypton, and now they're here.
Yeah.
Okay, so they're super powered like me. So it's a great sequel in that it ups the ante for effects. Now we're going to see 3 versus 1 Supermen and woman taking on and fighting and scrapping in Metropolis. But then I love that it goes, the heart of that movie for me is him revealing his identity to Lois now.
Yeah.
And what is that going to do? And love and him falling in love with Lois and willing to give up that power to be with her. And I think that's the heart of the movie with these big supervillains around. So there was another, it just, for me as a kid, it just continued what I loved about the first one, upped it a bit, but I was falling in love with Lois at the same time because I was at that age where I'm like, Lois Lane looks cute. Don't know why I'm feeling the way I'm feeling. So I'm getting there and I'm identifying with him, and the performance is great, but it's a very interesting chapter in these Superman movies because of Donner being fired by the Salkinds, and then having Richard Lester come in and finishing the work. Because then we saw what happens, and we'll get there with Superman 3 and Superman 4. But those are my memories of it. It just felt great. And I remember seeing, I was such a Superman fan that at the very end of the credits, Superman will return in Superman 3. And I was like, just losing my mind. So.
That's great. How about you, RB3?
I mean, this one I've seen a lot less. I'm actually mainly only familiar with the Donner cut of this movie.
Right.
Because that's the one they re-released in like 2006, if I'm not mistaken.
And I'm not a fan of it.
You're not a fan of it?
I just think it's maybe it's the nostalgia of why I watched it as much as I did as a kid, that I just don't accept any other version, and I'm looking at through rose-colored glasses. I probably should watch it again because it's unfair to say I'm not a fan of it. But I just think Donner's vision was he didn't complete it, and so when he went back to this, he didn't have everything he needed to complete it. Yeah, so it felt that way.
Yeah, it repeated the same ending as the first one, which I thought was like really ridiculous.
Yep.
So I mean, I think I'm familiar with the original version. I'm not 100% sure. But honestly, either way, I think this movie is still continues the same pattern that the first one had in terms of like having a compelling enough story. I mean, these movies are dated a little bit,
Sure.
I mean, the first one,
RB3.
I'm not saying that like controversially. I mean, I think it's fair to say the ending with the first one ending with the Earth spinning is a little, it's a little cheesy, but
sure,
I think it just looks cheesy too.
Yeah, but I mean, it's fair, and I mean, the ending to this one's a little cheesy too. But overall, I mean, I personally still dig it. I think it again, like I said, it kind of continues the legacy of Christopher Reeve's interpretation of it. While introducing like the antagonist to the other position. Yeah,
General Zod.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
And like you said, like it represents who his past represents. So it kind of it answers another question. I feel like a similar comparison today would be like Spider-Man 2, right? Where Spider-Man 2 is like, at least it makes you question what your identity of the superhero is. Like what's your place? What do you have to do? That's why he confesses to Lois. That's why he becomes more concerned with like the safety of the people around him while facing this kind of level of threat. So and I think it does that all very well.
Let's move on. 3 and 4.
Yeah. Well, I was gonna ask though, like as we're talking about the Donner cut versus the original cut, do you think the new kind of interpretation of that is the Snyder cut, right, with Justice League?
Oh yeah,
interesting.
Do you think there's a possibility that in 26 years we could get the release of the Snyder cut?
Justice League. Release the Snyder cut. # release the Snyder cut.
When Snyder said that he had one, I had changed my view because I was like, they don't have a Snyder cut. He was fired. He's out of there. And then when he said it, I'm like, oh. And then I should have been thinking about the Donner cut. I hope they do because Justice League was hot garbage.
I don't know if Reilly has heard it. I guess I'll say it now since we're probably not going to talk about Justice League. I have hot thoughts about it. I really do feel like the biggest tragedy in Hollywood history is Justice League. Like I really do, like in both, not just in the sense of a movie, but in the sense of like the way they used a personal tragedy to like be like, well, he has we fired him. Like I was like, oh, that's so messed up. Like this is a personal moment for him, and they got rid of him and kind of used that as an excuse. Like to me, that was so dirty. Yeah. And the fact that they made the fans believe that it was Zack Snyder's movie, but it never really was. Like that to me was the dirtiest move because people were like, well, who cares? He got fired. Yeah. To me, it was like, yes, but you never clarified what we were going to get. When I went to see this movie, I thought it was going to be a follow-up, but what I got was a Joss Whedon rehash. He just literally just went like this to the script, reshot the movie, and that's what it was. It was a Joss Whedon imitation
of the Avengers.
Of the Avengers. And it was terrible. And it was clearly something that, I immediately turned to my friend. I was like, that's the worst movie I've seen all year. Yeah. But because of the way they pushed Zack Snyder aside so much and kind of used that personal tragedy in his life. To me, I was like, man, that's dirty. That's so dirty.
I agree.
I just hate it.
It's everybody lost, and I don't even blame Joss Whedon because I think his hands were tied.
I think they were just like, do Avengers, and he's like, what do you mean? Just do Avengers.
It reeks of studio interference. It reeks of it because
not just that, but the fact that it's like 1:58, that because they needed to be under 2 hours.
Right.
That and then the fact that they pushed the release date even though the CGI was unfinished because they wanted the bonus. Like all these stories, I'm telling you, RB3, I'm gonna make this documentary.
Make the documentary.
I would love to help because it was. I don't know how in your right mind you start that movie with a shot of Henry Cavill with a CGI mustache.
Oh no!
Because you're telling me the first thing you see is cell phone footage of Henry Cavill, and not only that, like all of a sudden, this is before he dies in Batman v Superman, and you're telling me he went out there and got a different suit because it's bright as hell, completely different from what we saw in Zack Snyder's version, and then with the mustache, it's awful. But I don't think Zack Snyder. I wish he would have completed his vision because I think it would have been 10 times better.
It had vision, RB3. That's what we agreed on. That Batman v Superman has its up and downs, but it has vision.
At least he was taking some big swings.
Yeah, that's what it had. But either way, I don't know RB3 to answer your question, but 3 and 4. We're putting him as one movie.
All right, 3 and 4. Let's move on.
Man of Steel. No, I'm kidding. I to be honest, I don't have a lot of thoughts on these.
Oh, I can tell you anything you need to know, and that's you don't need to see these movies. They are not very good. If you want to really understand how screwed, talk about Snyder getting ousted on during Justice League.
That's what this happened with this.
Donner got ousted for going into part 2. Richard Lester comes in. He does his he finishes it, but he had a lot of footage already from Donner, so we already had the bones of the story and everything. Right. But if you want to see what Richard Lester would have done with Superman, watch Part 3.
Yeah, Superman 3, yeah.
And that, again, talking about reeking of studio kind of interference, God love Richard Pryor, but why are you putting him in a Superman movie?
Yeah.
Which I love him. I think he's fantastic.
I love Richard Pryor,
But it just felt so different.
Yeah.
The only part that I truly love about the character of Superman in Superman 3 is the fact he got that weird kryptonite and he goes bad. And so then he has that argument with himself, that fight in the junkyard where he takes out the bad version of himself in this really weird how are you fighting him fight and almost killing Superman, and then he disappears. So it's a little bit all over the place. We don't have Gene Hackman. We have the dollar store version of Gene Hackman and the same kind of character. I'm this businessman that has this great idea to build a big weapon, and then he has a blonde somebody that's his girlfriend that skis on top of a build. It's weird. It is weird. It's
Moving on.
Well, I think the Richard Pryor thing is fascinating because that was when he was at the height of his popularity. But he was also
so I get it why he's in there.
But it makes no sense for like the context of that movie.
You just said like taking it seriously. This is the opposite of that.
No, they didn't take it seriously. And they had the other Superman drinking in the bar. That was crazy. That's always the craziest. That became a meme. So.
Before we move on to Superman Returns 2006, I kind of want to do a quick little
disclaimer.
TV talk. Because obviously Lois and Clark. I'll briefly talk about my connection to that.
I watched a couple episodes.
I was going to say, as a kid, I really, and this is me in 1993, I think was the first episode. But this is when my connection to Superman was coming to fruition. It came from my brother, to be full, because he's the biggest I literally have like the Superman thing on my keychain. And I'm the Batman guy because I was the Batman guy as a kid. And that's my connection to my brother. But we both love Superman. But he, introduced Lewis and Clark to me. But the real thing that came out of TV to me was 1986 was the premiere of the Superman animated series.
Oh, yeah. It was fantastic.
I talked a lot about how it really does reminisce a lot about the Christopher Reeve Superman. And it brings him in the animated form. And it's great. And it's a great follow-up to the Batman animated series because it takes place in the same universe. And it has that same kind of grittiness that the Batman, not quite as much because it's Superman, but it's a great animated show. But what followed it is one of the greatest animated shows ever, RB3. And I'm telling you because I've showed you a little bit of it, and that's Justice League. And Justice League Unlimited is beautiful. Beautiful writing for characters like Lex, for characters like Superman. And it really takes the journey of Superman through that political atmosphere, especially with the Cadmus stuff. There's an episode called Patriot Act, which basically has this connection of, monitoring Superman and basically controlling his actions, which is very similar to Civil War. But it has that idea of who Superman is and what he represents, and it tackles that subject so well because I've, full disclosure, talked about my not distaste, but I don't really care for the Dark Knight Returns and the Dark Knight series for Frank Miller.
Well, that's the Superman.
Because
that's
of
about
the treatment of Superman. I personally was like, Frank Miller was trying to make a statement like, he's the Boy Scout, he's a Ronald Reagan fan, and I was like, that's not Superman.
No, I think what a lot of people don't understand is that Frank Miller was a hardcore conservative. So he took the perspective of Superman and kind of made that.
Yeah, but that's
he made him a government shill.
Exactly.
Superman was controlled by the government by the time he got to Batman.
Because in the animated series, he talks about specifically, his connection towards the government and being like, no, I want you to understand what I'm trying to do. But the journey of Superman in Justice League and the finale is incredible too when he battles Darkseid. Was a great villain. And then the finale even more with Lex saving the world because, spoiler, Lex saves the world because of his inspiration of Superman. And it comes full circle that he is the one to save the world using his intellect to defeat Darkseid. But that's kind of my spiel on that. I want to quickly talk about Smallville, something you guys have not seen either, I can tell.
I used to watch a couple episodes. I never really got full. It's
so good.
But I saw it was fun. I just never got into it for whatever reason.
And a lot of it has to do with the story of we know who Superman is. Let's see how he got there and how he was raised and the lessons that he learned in high school by his parents, by his friends. Like, this is Superman growing up. And we briefly see that in Man of Steel when it cuts back to, like, Superman gets beat up and Superman, has that, he saves the bus. Like, that's basically Smallville. And I can tell that Zack Snyder saw some of Smallville because
Yeah.
he does pay credit to that, and he actually has some Smallville actors in the movie as well.
That's right. Yeah.
So I just love that show, and I think a lot of people should check it out if you're a fan of Superman.
There it
100%.
is.
But 2006, unfortunately,
Yeah.
gave us Bryan Singer, who
Yeah, we don't have to talk about
let's
that.
not talk about
Yeah.
that because I had a full hour episode of me just ranting about this guy should be in jail and should be put.
Yep.
And should be like put on the freaking death train.
That was an M. Night Shyamalan episode.
Remember that?
Too.
When I just was ranting,
Just
dude.
randomly. I hope M. Night didn't listen to that episode.
I still feel like he should be in jail. But anyway, let's move on to. I feel like this movie hit the mark mainly because it's a sequel to the Reeve, Christopher Reeve one.
Yeah.
And I think that's why I was like, what is going on? Like, I remember me watching this in theaters and thinking, what is going on?
Right.
Yeah.
Like, I don't have a connection to any of this stuff. But it has some good moments. It does. And I still like, what's his name? Brandon Routh. I think he's great.
He was great.
Yeah.
Yeah, I thought he did an admirable job. I think
Of imitating Christopher Reeve, because that's what it was. It was an imitation.
it felt like an imitation. And then there was part of me though with Brandon Routh that it's like, why am I watching Superboy? Like he didn't look
like a man.
like a man.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Yeah. And that again is because of my love of Christopher Reeve. You know, and I just think that's a little too harsh for him. But I think. The story, I mean, the plane crash scene is fantastic.
It's great.
And tense and everything, but it was a little weird.
You know what it is for me, and another problematic person, Kevin Spacey.
Yeah.
It's Kevin Spacey as Lex, man. I thought that was bad.
Yeah,
I thought he was bad.
You think
He's
about
playing
it,
Gene Hackman.
but if you think about it on paper, that is a perfect casting.
100%. If they told me Frank Underwood as Lex,
Yeah.
yes.
Yeah.
Kevin Spacey as Lex, no.
even like The Usual Suspects, which Bryan
That's true.
Singer and Kevin Spacey.
That's so
did
true.
at
Like
that
if
point. If it was that same character,
if 3 years ago they said Kevin Spacey's Lex, you'd be like, oh, that's pretty, because you think of Frank Underwood.
Yeah.
You think of that very serious, like stern, like politician who's smarter than everyone else.
Right.
That's why I always mention Tywin Lannister. I don't know if Tywin to me that's Lex. Old man Lex, obviously, but that's Lex, where he's smarter than everyone else. He's cruel, but he's
great.
still,
I never put that together. I love that.
Because Tywin to me is the guy who's like one step ahead of everyone else and looks down on you because you're not smart enough. Like he's always like, you're dumb. You dumb. I already figured this out. But he's evil, but he's not full. He still thinks about his family, and he's still like he has that morally gray of Lex Luthor. And I love Lex. I can make a whole episode on him.
Sure.
But I don't know. What do you think about this movie? Looking back at it, 2006.
Well, I mean, like you said, they very much emulated the nostalgia of the first one. I watched a little bit of the behind the scenes. I actually watched the whole behind the scenes documentary that Robert Meyer Burnett actually was.
That's right.
He actually filmed and edited the entire thing. You see him in the reflections of some of the mirrors. I'm doing it, but it's funny. It's kind of interesting. They actually filmed this thing entirely digital. So it was like they filmed it digitally, but using like film like sensors or whatever. So they wanted to achieve like the old like kind of film like texture look, but using like digital cameras. And this is like very early on in the digital kind of like movement and waves. So that's why the movie kind of has a look to it. I don't personally think it looks very good.
No.
It's very like sepia kind of colored and very like monotonic. So that's the creativity, the idea they had was interesting, but I don't think it was fully executed all that great.
Yeah.
And I think the lack of action is something that a lot of people complain about. I kind of agree. I think.
To me, it's just Lex.
Yeah, and I feel like they repeated a lot of kind of character beats from the
original.
Donners.
Yeah.
Because I mean, it's like Lex Luthor is again looking for real estate.
Yeah.
He wants in 78's Donner, he wants to blow up the coast, and then what he bought in the middle, that's beachfront property. Now he wants Kryptonian real estate. Build this
it made
weird
no
thing.
sense.
It was very muddled, and then I didn't understand the Lois Lane Clark Kent. How does she have a kid thing? That was a little muddled.
The bulletproof condom that.
So how does that work? And then Superman's kind of a stalker. He's kind of like hanging outside the window, and I know he loves Lois, but he's looking in. He's using his powers to look in, and for
something
a snapshot.
that he wouldn't do.
I don't think Superman would have done that. I don't think so. So I had a lot of problems with that movie.
Well, what's good is that we got what year did this come out? 2012.
2000.
That trailer is still one of the greatest trailers ever,
For Man of Steel.
for Man of Steel.
Yeah.
I remember
before The Dark Knight Rises.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
I remember watching that trailer and thinking, "Oh my God,
Yeah.
this is what I've been looking for my entire life."
Same.
But I really liked. I love this movie. I love Man of Steel, and I think
too.
that a lot of people unfairly judge it. I really feel like the people who judge this movie and are like, "Oh, this movie's not good," like this movie when they first saw it, and then heard the feedback.
Well, see,
and
what I wonder-
really feel that.
So I'm not gonna lie, like that's my journey with
Okay.
like I watched it and I walked out and I was like, oh, that was really cool. But
Yeah.
like as an action fan, I'm like, oh, that's really cool. But it was actually this is the movie that actually kind of got me really into like Collider, and at the time it was AMC because it was literally the movie that I was like, I just don't really know how to feel about this. Like after I walked out, you know, like
Really?
I was impressed by the action, but I was like, is this like really a good movie or am I just stupid? Or so I started watching like AMC movies. So I started watching Screen
I remember
Junkies, like
that.
all of that stuff. That was literally like the jump point for me. Like
I remember when they were talking about it. Too,
Yeah,
'cause I was
yeah.
watching as well when I was back home in Phoenix.
Schmoes I watched. I was already like listening to Schmoes, but that's when I started like becoming more regular. So it was like stuff like that. So it was actually kind of funny that movie kind of inspired that at me. So it was a period where I really liked it. Like immediately after I saw it, and then I kind of started not liking it just because I felt like
You had to not like it?
Yeah, I just had to. Well, not had to not like it, but it also made sense why it was a bad movie too. Like
Sure.
the arguments that people present for not liking it are a lot of times are very valid.
They're pretty
you know,
valid,
like,
yeah.
The
Superman doesn't kill.
Yeah, even some people criticize like how nihilistic it is. You know, like how like morbid. You know, some people say it's dark for no reason. You know, a lot of those criticisms at the time kind of resonated with me. But now looking at where the DC EU is now, or I don't know exactly what to call it, the DC universe.
Yeah,
but,
I don't know.
DC movies.
But seeing where DC movies are now, I actually have a lot more appreciation and respect for what they was doing because again, like I like vision. You know, I like that Zack Snyder had a very hardcore like vision,
Specific
and
version.
exactly what he was
Especially
going for.
when we
what
see
he was going for.
Krypton.
Yeah.
That's what
yeah.
he's going for.
Krypton was very much. I mean, I personally love James Cameron's Avatar movie too.
Oh, yeah.
I know a lot of people don't like it, but it's very much reminiscent of like that
That's
opening
right.
of the opening of that
Sure.
movie. So,
But it's interesting because I was rewatching this movie last night, and it's the idea of so when Jor-El is talking to Superman in the first act, I believe,
Yeah.
and he tells him about the story of Krypton, and he says we are suffering from I forget the exact words, but predetermined births is what he said, and he said that everyone born on Krypton is born for a specific purpose. So essentially, the theme of the movie is this idea of destiny and choosing your own path, and,
Right.
and having the freedom to
That's what I
be
love.
whoever you want to be. Essentially,
Yeah.
is like I don't know if she says it in this movie or in Batman v Superman, but when she says you can be a hero or you cannot be a hero, you can be whatever you want, is what Martha says too. And I think that's BVS, but I might be wrong. I
think so,
But that's
yeah.
the theme of the movie essentially, is that he can be Superman, but if he just wants to be a farmer, settle down with a wife and chill, he can do that too. And that's the idea of why he chooses to be Superman.
Yeah, I adore this movie. It got,
Yeah.
and I remember I went through similar things, but never maybe on the other side of the pendulum swing for URB3. But like, I watched it, I loved it. I walked out of it, I watched it again, and I was like, I don't know about this. And then as I kept watching, I was like, I kind of got what Snyder was going for. I love that. I mean, I never understood. You know, you can never have, it seems in the fandom lately, gray characters. You know, like meaning that it's like, you know, Superman killed Zod, and I know that really bent some people out of shape, you know.
I remember reacting in the theater, and I was like, "Oh no,
Yeah.
not
but-
my Superman!"
Not my Superman, but that wasn't.
Yeah.
He was on the first day of the job.
Yeah. And
I
looking
think
back
that-
at it, like if that's, and Zach very much said, that's why he doesn't kill, because he killed before. Like
Exactly. And that's
like
what
he tastes blood, and he's like, I don't want to taste this ever again.
I wish that we got more of that in
Yeah.
Batman v
They
should-
Superman,
if
if
they
we
would
because
had
explain
Man of
that.
Steel 2, this would have been
that
so
would have
much
been the
better.
theme.
Yeah.
And I did a Riley Roundtable with Jason Inman where we go into that. We pitch our Man of Steel 2.
I watched that. Actually,
Yeah.
I listened
Oh, really?
to that.
And we
Yeah.
call
I
it
see
Man
that.
of Tomorrow because it's him. The events of Man of Steel color who he is now. So he's never going to kill again because of his experience with Zod. He's going to make sure that he takes collateral damage out of the equation and fly out of there because
Like
he
Goku.
cares. You know, and these are the things that he learned. And I think everybody unfairly piled on not just Zack Snyder, but the characters in the movie itself because they were like, well, that's not my Superman. It's like, that's not the story he was telling.
Sure. And it's no one's Superman because this is his first day. I don't think we've ever seen Superman on his first day.
That's what I loved.
It would look kind of like this.
It
him
would.
making mistakes.
That's why I think he went over, and I would have pulled it back a little bit, but all the buildings and everything falling down.
Which was pretty amazing.
It was amazing, but that was his point, is that two superpowered beings finally coming to blows in Metropolis. This is what it would look like. And then what does Clark Kent do in that situation? Well, right now he's just trying to get this guy is powerful.
Yeah.
But also let me talk to him, and there is so much going on. If you peel back those layers, I mean, it's the deepest Superman dive any movie has done as far as
it's
character.
It's a deconstruction.
It's a deconstruction of the superhero mythos. And that's what I love so much, that we then tossed away to get a shared universe, to get a Batman in there, to get a Wonder Woman in there, to get a Justice League. They were thinking, with Batman v Superman, they were thinking about Justice League before they were thinking about Batman v Superman.
Yeah.
And that was Warner Brothers.
Yeah.
And Zack Snyder had that plan. And I wish he would have seen it to completion.
And I think that's kind of how we can end this discussion, because we should end it. Is that you're right, man. I really do feel like all the ideas that came from Man of Steel were so interesting to me, and the idea of like how Lex would react and how he would use that as a smear campaign against, like, all that sounded so cool. And unfortunately, we didn't get that because of what I feel like the biggest downfall for me from BVS, and the biggest reason why I don't like the movie, besides Jesse Eisenberg, which I hate, is that idea of, like, we get a Superman sequel and Superman's in it for, like, literally my mom says, is Superman going to talk at all?
Yeah.
Like, that's what my mom watching the movie.
Well, it made it even worse.
He's in it for 15 minutes.
It made it even worse because the times he did talk, it was just awful, like, performance. Like the time when
don't you talk about my Henry Cavill like that?
Nah. But the time there's that one scene where he meets Batman for the first time. He's like, "Hey, you're the Bat. Get out of the." He talks. I'm like, "Yo, whoa. Somebody can give him like a little bit of direction." So I mean, I'm personally like, I
love Henry Cavill as Superman.
I love Henry Cavill, but
I think he is Superman.
I do think there are some things that Zack Snyder could have done. Like, I'm not even like Zack Snyder off the hood completely.
I agree.
I
hiring Jesse Eisenberg.
That's
the biggest
crazy
mistake he ever made.
I think.
And if you read that story, I'm sorry, but I read that story when it was coming out. He wasn't gonna be Lex, and Jesse pushed for that. Just so you guys know. And I was like, man.
Who was he going to be? Was he going to be the son?
I forget. He was going to be something else, but he really pushed, like, oh, if you're going to put me in this movie, I want to have a main villain role. And he was like, fine, you can be Lex Luthor. And he's like, yes, Lex, I'll be Lex.
Well, see, that's the thing. Like, I like the idea of it being a social media, like, owner kind of. So
I do too. I just hate the
great
performance.
Yeah. Well, I think a lot of the ideas.
And I'll say this. I've said it before, and I said it on the Wangers when it's Max Landis as Lex Luthor.
Yeah.
Who the F wants to see that? I'm sorry, but come on.
Well, he was going for more of the Mark Zuckerberg.
No, he was
Social
going.
Network.
That's not true at all. He was going for Max Landis.
He was.
I think he
That's the
even said
rumor,
it in an
and
interview.
he sounds it, and
he's just like, here we go, guys.
Again, I appreciate the swing. Swing
that's what I'm
for
saying.
the fences.
I think there's a lot of great ideas, but
there's
great
great
ideas.
I agree.
Yeah.
The idea of Lex's actions in BVS made total sense to me.
Right.
His company made total sense to me. Every decision he makes was like, yes, that's Lex. The performance was not Lex.
Right.
Him being a goofy, like, going, I guess I meet you. Like, it was just bad. It was bad, man. It was. I don't know.
I think for me, like Zack Snyder, there's just a couple fundamental things that I think if you would have rooted in the story a little more, it would have. For me, I think for the first Man of Steel, there's that whole sequence where the planes are kind of just crashing into buildings, and then Superman's on the other side of the world, like finding the tentacle arms thing.
Right.
I think it just if it just would have been a little more efficient if Superman, instead of fighting tentacles there, he would have fought tentacles like at the spot he was supposed to be at while saving some planes, Like,
I see.
Right.
I think it just would have been a little easier to.
But he makes it back in like 2 seconds.
I know, but then the plane's already crashed at that point, so it's like it's already. But I think if you saw a little more of Superman saving people, I think that would have been great.
I agree with that.
I agree.
But I think definitely between Man of Steel and Batman versus Superman, though, there's so many themes and so much is trying to say. That I think we can't undervalue, because I think a lot of superhero movies today, frankly, they don't say a lot. I think a lot of them do. I think a lot of Marvel movies recently have incorporated like bigger themes and messages.
Sure.
But I think to me there's a severe lack of that overall.
And that's what he
movies,
has. Zack Snyder has vision. That's what and he has talent. He really does.
Yeah.
Riley, thank you so much for joining me.
Oh, my pleasure.
Where can the good people find you?
Oh, you can find me at Reilly Round on Twitter. The Reilly Roundtable drops every Thursday on Collider Conversations podcast feed. Rule of Two goes live now on live. We're playing with the format, but Mondays, Monday evening, Rule of Two with Mark Fernandez. We do deep dive Star Wars talk, and that's on Collider Video and Jedi Council Podcast 1 feed.
Awesome, man. Thank you so much for coming in,
My
man.
pleasure.
I really
This
do.
was great.
I
Thanks,
love this
guys.
character, and I guess my last thing will be check out the animated movies, man. Superman versus the Elite, All-Star Superman. Great.
I love the All-Star Superman comic, and I've been meaning to catch the movie.
Great. It's like a condensed version of it.
Yeah.
But it's still so good, and there's a lot of great animated movies
1940
out there.
cartoons too. 1940 cartoons. They're actually really cool. They're actually really cool.
All right, for the Meaning of Podcast, I am Ace.
This is RB3.
And we are peacing out. Peace out, guys.